Hello. We are now live.
Hello.
Um, as usual, give people a couple minutes to trickle in. Do 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 do. But yeah, Aaron, how's it going? We are coming up on the end of the year here. Everyone's disappearing for the holidays next week. What's how's life?
Life is good. I've been starting to prep. I start teaching again in the spring. So I've been doing a lot of thinking about what I'm teaching and then also taking advantage of not being teaching at the moment to like play some games, read some things, enjoy
Yeah,
some stuff. I
yeah.
finally read Babel. Like I'm like so far
Oh,
behind in
nice.
my reading.
How
That's
was it?
like
Did you
eight
like it?
years. It was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. It was a really interesting book. And it's funny because I'm also playing Heaven's Vault, which is a
Wait, what's Heaven's?
language decoding.
Oh,
Heaven's
that
Vault is
one.
a video game by Inkle where like you go around and you try to like find languages and decode
Yeah,
languages. What's that word? Translate them.
yeah.
So I feel very languagey at the
Hell
moment.
yeah. I I've
How
heard
about
such
you?
good things about that game. I truly hate a puzzle game is the problem. Like I wish I liked puzzle games. There's
What?
so many interesting indie puzzle games, but I don't like them. I don't like doing puzzles and brain teasers and things like that. I hate puzzles in games. It's like Resident Evil games like make me insane halfway through. I'm just like, I don't make me solve one more like I have to move this thing around so that thing opens thing, you know?
What's funny is okay, so visual puzzles like that, I'm very bad. I'm not a
Uh-huh.
visual person, so the like hit this switch for that switch, not always, but like I love puzzle games, like my favorite kind of game. I'm
It
like
makes sense.
make me solve a puzzle and stab things, but mostly a puzzle.
I mean, people love puzzle games, and truly, like so many of the best games over the last, I don't know, like 5, 10 years are like indie puzzle games or even like Zelda games. You know what I mean? So I feel like I'm missing out, but I don't enjoy the experience of playing them.
Wait, what do you like then in your games?
Uh, I mean, like I guess stuff that's like more mechanically oriented, you know what I mean? It's like I think why I like Souls games so much, you know what I mean? Because there is that rhythm of play or, I really love like card games like, Balatro apparently is pronounced. I just learned that yesterday. And
Oh,
Slay the Spire and things like that. Like I
that's
like
not as much
roguelikes. I
fun.
like things that are or like Hades, things like that. Things that are more driven by a game loop in a certain way rather than like I need to solve a puzzle to progress.
Mm,
So like I like the
that's
intellectual
so funny because
challenge of
I
it,
would
but it's
describe Slay the Spire as a puzzle game. To me, it's like a
see, I
mechanical
think it's
puzzle. But I know what you mean.
different. Yeah, I mean it's a strategic game, and I like strategic games. But I think it's
Mm.
like the iterative process. God, that word's hard to say sometimes. That I enjoy less the like sitting and staring at a thing and being like, if I just think about this in the right way, I'll figure it out, and I'll never figure it out. So I feel stupid now.
That that makes sense. That makes sense. You might like Heaven's Vault, which is a lot less like puzzly as
Yeah,
a puzzle game, and a lot more just explory. If that makes any sense. If that's
yeah,
your jam, but
yeah. From what I've heard, it does seem like a little bit more up my alley. But it was like I tried Outer Wilds, which every single person I know like adores that game. It's the one that it's like a
I
time loop
can't with that
thing, and they're
game.
like, you hated it or you loved it? Wait,
So
which one
I
did?
own it, but it
Yeah,
requires you to. I hate it. I don't hate it.
yeah.
I would love
I
it,
cannot drive that
but it
spaceship.
requires you to fly this ship, and I
Yeah,
just crash it. I crash it everywhere,
I'm sorry, that ship is
and I
so
can't
hard
get
to
far
fly.
enough to experience the narrative. It's too much for me. I'm like, is there a mod that will fly this ship for me? And then I would love this game, but apparently, getting good at that is part of the game loop that I can't. I can't.
Yeah, yeah, I'm
Anyway.
with you. I also really struggled with that ship, and I was just like, you know what? And I'm not enjoying these puzzles, and I understand that there's a very beautiful narrative at the core to this game that I'm simply missing. But not everything is for every person. Um,
That's
so
true.
yeah. Anyways, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on our Q&A live stream this month. Obviously, I am Dongwan Song, and I'm one of the hosts tonight, and I'm joined tonight by my co-host, Aaron Roberts. This is a monthly series where we answer questions that have been submitted by our lovely Patreon supporters. The stream is free for everyone, but if you want to have your questions answered on the show, go to patreon.com/writingexcuses. Now, I think partially because it's end of year and holiday madness, we only have one question, although it's like a pretty hefty one. So if those of you watching the stream have your own questions, feel free to start dropping them in the chat as we go, and we'll just answer questions from the audience tonight too. But yeah, should we start with the question that we have?
Yes.
Aaron, do you want to read it out?
Let's go.
Okay.
Should I read the whole thing?
I'm gonna leave it to you of how much of you want to read.
It's long.
Maybe let's skip the first graph and talk. Let's focus more on the second graph than the first graph. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there's for those who are not looking at it on the other screen, which is everyone but me. There is a lot about sort of what this person has done, Joseph, the whole year and everything they've gone through, and then the question really is, what should I focus on for next year? I want to write almost every day, taking breaks from my main book every month or so as needed, and submit to an agent almost weekly. But I also want to focus on getting results. I know what I want, which is to get a literary agent and to get a publisher, but I want to be realistic. I want to have a good plan, and I want to figure out what I should do for the next year. How do I do that?
Yeah. I mean, this is such a great question, and we're coming up on the end of the year, so I think it's time for all of us to start thinking about what are our goals for 2025. I was like, I had to look at the date. I was like, what year are we in right now? Yeah, like think about our goals for 2025. Think about our goals going forward, and also like reflecting on what we accomplished this year and how we feel about those things. And so I think it's really natural to start thinking about, okay, I did these things, I didn't get to where I wanted, but what do I do next and how I plan for next year? So like, do you have a process for that? Is that something you do every year in terms of setting those goals, or how do you think about that?
I think every year I say that I have an annual process for doing it, but in truth, I'm not sure that they're consistent. Every year, I think I come up with something and it's a little bit different, it's a little bit off from what it was the previous year. But I do often use actually my birthday, which was a couple months ago, or the end of the year to kind of do some reflection. I like birthdays because you feel sometimes a little less caught in the New Year resolution madness that can be going on around you. But a lot of what I want to do is think, what did I do? Because first of all, a year is long. A year is like a novel in some ways. I think it's more than a person can hold in their head. Like, you know, they're like a short story you can hold in your head, a novel you can't. I can hold a month or two in my head of what I've done or significant achievements, but really thinking about what I've done the whole year is difficult, and I'll forget things. So I like to look back as best I can and go, what did I even do? What was cool about it? Like, what did I actually enjoy? What was awesome? And then also, what, you know, do I want to do going forward? Like, what do I want to keep? What do I want to toss? Like, what do I want more of? What do I want less of? I don't know. What about you? I can get more in depth and like there's charts because it's me and graphs, but sometimes.
Unsurprisingly, I have a different approach. I mean, I think there's a lot of overlap, especially in intention. I think very different in terms of process, right? Like, I think I'm somewhat less structured when I approach things than you are, as we know all too well. But, you know, I think for me, it is also kind of similar, like, oh, I do a thing every year. What I do is very different from year to year. I think the hardest part is when considering sort of like accomplishments and reflecting on that and considering sort of goals for next year is to be able to set goals, but to let go of expectations. You know what I mean? It's like there are things that you can be working towards, but I think there's sometimes when you set a really rigid expectation or make a sort of like internal commitment. So, you know, things that would give me hesitations in terms of what this question is saying and is, you know, writing almost every single day, you know, like this really structured approach to like how you're going to write, when you can submit to agents, all those things. And I think sometimes when you set goals that are that specific, if you ever fall off, it can be very frustrating and very hard on your mental health and hard to sort of like get back on the process, right? So, what I think of is more about practices rather than goals, and intentions rather than, specific targets, right? So, like, what are the things that I want to focus on, and how are ways that I want to integrate that into my life that isn't necessarily like a structured, like, I'm going to run 5 miles a day for the next month or whatever it is, right? Like, is that making sense? Like, I think finding a way.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes me think of actually the thing that I think Mary Robinette talked about or came up with during the pandemic of like essence and
Hmm.
expression, which I stole from her and love and use all the time, which is that there's like the core of something and then how you're doing it at this moment. Like one thing I
Mm-hmm.
do like about goals that are like run 5 miles or write every day is they are action. So I always prefer like an action thing
Hmm.
to like a result thing because you can't control results, but you can control theoretically to an extent your actions. You don't know what'll
Yeah.
happen around you, but at least you know that theoretically you could run 5 miles, whereas like win the Boston Marathon might be a harder,
Right.
just mildly
Is it
harder
between
goal to hit because
submit
you
to an
don't know
agent?
what other
Yeah.
people are doing
Yeah. Exactly.
and get an
The difference
agent.
between submitting to an agent
Exactly.
every week versus I will have an agent in 2025, right? Like, I think those are two very different ways to approach it. And what you're saying is the action of submit once a month or whatever it is different from the expectation of like, I will have an agent next year, right?
Yeah. But what you're saying, I think, is even more flexible and probably more realistic, which is why are you doing that thing? So if the reason is like, I'm running 5 miles a day because like I really care about my heart health, like that's what it's
Mm-hmm.
about. Or like I love listening to bird calls, whatever the reason is, you could have running 5 miles to be an expression of a lot of different essences. And
Mm-hmm.
like, so figuring out like what is the thing that you're trying to get to? Is it like I want to feel healthy, therefore I'm going to attempt to run 5 miles a day? But if that fails, then you could be like, well, really the goal was to be healthy, so this expression did not work for me. Let me see, is there a different expression of this essence that is going to
Mm-hmm.
be still the thing that I want, like you're talking about the intention, but doesn't necessarily mean that like if I don't do the expression of that intention, the whole thing needs to be like, you know, put to the torch.
Right. Right. And it's the double-edged sword, right? Because you're right that if you don't have specific actions, then it's very easy to lose focus on the intention that you're setting and not work towards it, right? So if you're like, I want to feel healthier, then it's like, okay, that's nice. How are you doing that? Whether that's run 5 miles a day or cook better or, do whatever it is, right? Like there's so many different ways to express that sometimes when you just have that one thing, it can be very sort of unfocused. So for me, it's always like trying to find a balance between those things in terms of like not being so attached to an expectation that I become disappointed if I don't follow through on it in exactly the way that I envisioned. Like I have a perfectionist streak somewhere in me, right? And I think a lot of um, me staying on task and on target is sort of managing the space between perfectionism and reality, right? Like the world is the way it is. My brain works the way it is. I'm not going to be able to deliver if I continually need things to be at a certain place, right? And so I think thinking about why am I actually trying to do this thing at a more fundamental level kind of helps give me a cluster of options in terms of like again expressing how I want to improve my health is I can go for a walk today. That counts, right? I can, you know, cook myself dinner today that's like healthier than certain other options. That also counts, right? All those things can move you towards that goal. So, if your intention is to become a professionally published author, then there's so many ways to express that. And that can even be I'm going to read this book because it's important for me to know what's happening in the field around me. I'm going to write 5,000 words today because I want to have a huge writing day. I'm going to submit to an agent because that fulfills that goal, right? And so I think being able to have all these different expressions of a core intention, I don't know, that sounds like a really nice way to be moving into the year in terms of thinking about what it is you can do around those things.
Yeah, and I love that you said reading as part of that, because I think one thing I was about to ask you is it can be difficult, I think, in the writing world, because ultimately, while it's nice to say, I only care about like sort of my core intention, if your intention is to be published, there is a certain amount that there is like, it's hard to, at a certain point, you are going to have to do a certain set of
Hmm.
things. Like if you
Yeah.
never write, it's difficult to be published. If you never submit, if you never, like it's not going to, who knows, could happen. Someone could trip over your manuscript, but it's unlikely.
Hmm.
And so, how do you balance that with not getting sort of feeling trapped by, other people? Like, I've got to do this. And if I didn't do this and I failed at that. And I love the idea that like becoming more a part of the community in whichever way that is, like
Yeah.
reading more, finding out more about what other people are writing in general, like checking
Hmm.
out a new format, like I'm going to explore poetry this month because
Hmm.
I want to be a better prose stylist, and therefore what I'm going to do for this month is read a bunch of poetry and see what I learned from it. And
Hmm.
and those are ways to like become the better writer that helps you become more published. I'm going to do every writing excuses exercise all year long.
Listen to every
Or else,
episode
no,
that
I'm
we
just
ever
kidding.
recorded. Yeah.
And then that way you can like feel like that way you're still doing something, even
Yeah.
if it's in addition to the putting words on the page and the submitting and all of that. So I think that's big for me. One other thing I think is really funny is I feel like in some way our approaches are the opposite of who we are in a weird way. So I am very structured in the way I approach things because I have a very chaotic mind, and
Uh-huh.
if I don't structure it, I'll lose track of
Uh-huh.
everything. So like a lot of the structures I build are to like build walls around a chaotic garden. And you're like, oh,
Hmm.
you're feeling
Hmm.
more perfectionist. So you're like, I need to chill and like
Yeah.
allow things to breathe. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's like you got to
That
find
makes
sort of
sense.
who you are and what process works for you,
Hmm.
which
And
is
it's interesting that for
an
both of us, the
odd thing to
process is a
think
little
about.
bit kind of counter to maybe our core instinct, right? Like for me, sometimes I like structure a little bit too much, you know what I mean? And then, but also in practice, am bad at actually enacting or living within structure, right? So I know that intellectually I like it, I want to perform it, but then I will inevitably become really frustrated by my inability to execute on it, right? So, I think as with so many things we say on the show, so much of it starts with getting to know yourself, right? How do you work best? How do you want to be in the world? My only like hard and fast rule when it comes to this is don't make your goals dependent on things you can't control, right? And again, this is the having your book published versus submit to a publisher, right? Those are two different goals. One of which you have complete control over, which is I wrote this thing and I send it out. The other is something you have no control over, which is someone else responding the way you want them to, right? And you can't control that, right? You can take your best shot. Um, and so, I think as people are thinking about what are your writing goals, I know everyone gets very focused on publication as the target in so many ways. But I think finding the core reasons that you're writing and using that as your intention can be a really powerful way to move through the process.
Yeah. I also think the end of the year for me is a good time to like step off the treadmill a little bit and
Yeah.
just make sure that the things I'm doing are the things I still want to do
Hmm.
versus things I just think I should be doing because I said I was going to do them X number of years ago. And then it's like, and now I'm going and going and going. And for like novels, it could be like, not to say like everyone trash your novel, but like if you have something that you're working on that you've been trying to get published, how are you feeling it still? Like, do you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
maybe it's a good time to like reread the novel that you've been querying and say like, how am I still loving it? Is there anything I would, you know, change about it, or do I want to, as I'm sending this out, is there a side project that I really wish I was working on but I've been so focused on this thing that I want to do? So part of what I'm doing this
Hmm.
year is actually looking back at the activities I've done and been like, and kind of evaluating on them. I'm like, how long did it take me to do this? How much did I enjoy it? How beneficial was it to me, either
Hmm.
like monetarily or professionally or personally? And then go, okay, which of these things do I want to see more of? Whether or not I
Hmm.
have control of that at the moment, it helps me know later when I'm running downhill how to evaluate what's a good path to take and what's not a good path to take. If I look back at the paths I've taken and go, that one was kind of a detour, maybe not, maybe don't go in the woods next time. Or like that one was beautiful actually and had an unexpected sunset. And like that's definitely, if I ever get a chance to go that way again, I should. And so I
Yeah,
kind of like to look at that and then
totally.
use that to give my body almost some it's like give my subconscious better tools to be able to evaluate when my conscious gets busy, which often
Yeah,
happens anytime but now.
yeah, yeah. I feel that very intensely. Is there anything on your list that are things that you're considering, like, not that you're necessarily taking it off or putting it on, but like, what are the things that you're encountering? Like, oh, I need to reflect a little bit more on how this fits into my life.
Interesting. I was like, I want to ask you that while I think. But I don't know. I
I can try
think
and answer it first.
some
Go ahead.
yeah, go for it. No, no,
Um,
no.
I it's a really tough question. You're the one who sort of brought up the framework, and as I'm thinking about it, like I think one thing for me is, you know, I think TTRPG is a big part of my life. I play a lot of games. I run a lot of games, and a thing that I've been noticing recently is I keep finding myself very constrained on my ability to prep, right? And somehow I think I used to run
Hmm.
3 to 4 games in parallel, and I'm realizing I really can't do that anymore. And I don't know whether that's because I leveled up in how I GM in a certain way that requires heavier prep or like more thoughtfulness, or the rest of my life got busier and I just don't have the bandwidth to think about it as much as I want to. But I think for me, realizing that like I don't have the bandwidth to be running, more than 2 games at once. Ideally, I'd almost drop down to one right now, but I have, the problem is you have commitments to a group, and then other things, yeah, you have in development. So I sort of like kind of feel at capacity in a way that I haven't in a long time, and realizing that like, oh, I need to manage that, I need to keep an eye on
Hmm.
that, so that I could be giving the kind of creative attention and energy to both groups that I really want to, and then balancing that against the rest of my life and all the other like creative pursuits that I have.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think for me, it's a little bit, and I think we did. It's funny because we recorded a podcast about the end of year intention
Yeah.
setting. So we possibly, I feel like we said it differently then. So and
Mm-hmm.
there are obviously other people in the room who had their own thoughts. So it won't be a full repeat for those who will hear it like next week. But I think a lot of what I'm thinking about is that it is easier sometimes for me to prioritize the obligations given to me by others than the ones given to me by myself, which is a
Mm-hmm.
problem many people have. Which it can be a lot easier to do a thing that's like an assignment, or that you feel like someone's waiting for this thing, whether that's true or you just told yourself it's true. And for everyone who goes to a holiday party and tells your family member you're a writer, and they go, "Have I seen your book on the shelf?" Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's sometimes those pressures are just
Yeah.
societal and what people understand it means to be a writer. Um, like, they're like, "Is it at
100%.
Target?" No, but thank you. Um, and I think that it's one of those things is that, oh, we have a nice comment here,
Mm-hmm.
that I just got distracted reading. But I think part of what I'm doing really is thinking about who am I, and like, who is the sole total of who I am? Like my health. One of the reasons I was talking about health is like I can often like do too much and not sleep and like not focus on
Mm-hmm.
things. So a lot of what I'm thinking about is like when I'm choosing projects, when I'm choosing things to work on, am I also leaving space for myself? And that includes space to read, write, play games. I think sometimes you'll hear writers talk about their TBR lists and like there's no one's reading because we're so
Yeah.
busy writing. But it's
Yeah.
really important to stay engaged and to be writing and to be
Yeah.
playing games if you make games. And so I think making that a real part of the equation, it for me is one of the things that's really important. And that means sometimes saying no to stuff because I'm saying yes to my own stuff, and which is hard to
Mm-hmm.
do for me, but doable.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah, making space for
well, now we've
rent
got
is, or
questions.
not rent, for rest is is
Also
incredibly
rent,
hard.
my
Also rent.
landlord
The
says.
problem is that
Yeah.
making space for rent eats into your ability to make space for rest, right? And balancing those two is a real motherfucker sometimes. So, um anyways, let's answer some questions. Okay, Michelle Stewart. Uh
Absolutely.
Heard an artist describe how he'll get so into a long project that he completely loses sight of whether or not he still thinks it's any good. I'm so feeling that with the novelette I'm writing. Is it just me? Um, yeah. What are your thoughts on working on longer form projects? I mean, I know you're mostly a short form person, but like, how do you? I mean, even when you're
I
writing a
am, but
short
I'm
story, even
not. So
yeah. Hmm.
yeah, so it takes me forever to write short stories, so they're all long projects. But a lot of my game writing work is like very long. Like I've been working on one project for 2 years. Like so, you really get into it for long, long periods of time. And I think that definitely happens to me. Like I try, I don't. It just feels like you're stuck sometimes in the middle of anything. Think in the middle of like life, in the middle. That's why people have midlife crises, in the middle of a
Hmm.
race, in the middle of a relationship. There's always a moment where you might be like, why did I even begin this? And is this even, what is even happening here? And I think that a lot of times when that happens, sometimes you just need to step away for a moment and like
Hmm.
come back to it with fresh eyes. One of the funnest things I think to do as a writer is to find something you wrote a little while ago and have kind of forgotten about, like maybe a line or a scrap of paper, an idea, and read it and go, that was actually really cool. Like, what an awesome idea. And at the time, you probably didn't think much of it. But I think distance can help you see your writing and be excited by it again, as opposed to like in the middle of it. It's kind of
Hmm.
like taking that feeling from the end of a workout versus when you're right in the middle of a really annoying part of it. And you're like,
Yeah.
why am I going up this hill? But once you get up
Yeah.
there, you're like, wow, it's great. I can't believe I came all this way.
Yeah, I mean, I
What about
think
you?
part of the problem is asking, "Is this good?" When you're halfway through your third set. The answer is always going to be no. This is bad. It's awful. I hate this. This is miserable. Right? Like, you know, if you're asking yourself when you're in it, it becomes incredibly hard to answer that with any real clarity. Right? So sometimes what you kind of have to do is push through and finish the task first and then step back and ask yourself, is it good? Like, is it good is like, I think asking that while you're trying to do the thing will actually make it very hard to keep doing the thing or to do the work that will make it good, right? So, again, I think letting go of expectations is kind of a thing that I talk about a lot in general, but um, I do think it really applies in this case, where sometimes when you're in the middle of the task, it's about finishing the task, not about evaluating it in the moment. And that's the thing that when you're done, step back and, like you're saying, let it sit for a second, let it marinate, come back to it, and look at it with fresh eyes, right? Um, and yeah, I mean, I think again that metaphor of trying to figure it out when you're in the middle of the workout is almost impossible, right? Because your brain's just going to tell you this is hard and I would like to not be doing it anymore because writing is hard, you know?
Yeah. I also think something you said, as usual, made me think of something because you're brilliant. And what it was making me think of was the idea that sometimes also what is good, what we believe to be good, is based a little bit on what our actual sense of judgment, but also like what we think we should be writing.
Yeah.
And so sometimes if you stop in the middle and try to think, is this any good? You'll start altering your actual natural writing style to like hit something that's like an idealized version of the writing that should be in the world, which isn't
Yeah.
you. I think the thing most important in the moment is, what is this? Is it the thing I want it to be? Is this the story I'm trying to tell, more than is this objectively good? Because then you can get lost, and I've done this, and start overwriting your own writing in order to try to like make it some beautiful thing. And then you come back later and you're like, this doesn't feel like something I wrote. It feels like something that I saw written somewhere else.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right, and it's like stopping to ask that question lets all those other voices in, right? Because our sense of what is good or not is so in conversation with all the other stuff we've read, everything we learned in English class, everything we read in the paper or see reviewed on Goodreads or whatever it is. Saying that you read in the paper was the most like millennial boomer thing I could have possibly said right there. I was like, nobody reads the paper anymore. What am I talking about? Anyways, um, absolute sideline that does not matter. But like, I think when you stop to consider and evaluate in the middle, you're letting all of those voices into the creative process. And sometimes you need to protect the creative process and finish doing the thing in the way that you would do it, and then assess, do I need to do it differently? Do I need to edit it? Do I need to shift up my approach? Right. And so I think, Michelle, in so many ways, you're asking, is it just me? And the answer is no. It is literally everybody. I've never talked to another writer who doesn't have this issue, right? Like, I think it is actually kind of intrinsic and kind of important to the creative process in a very real way.
Agreed.
Cool. Shall we move on to the next one?
Yes, and you know how to pop it on the screen in such a cool way. I was like, whoa, how did you do that?
There you go.
Amazing.
Do you want to read that?
Magic. Yeah, this question from Kareen. If I mispronounce your name, I apologize. Do you have any advice on writing scenes with lots of characters present? I find it difficult not to make these scenes overwhelming for the reader. Do you have any advice on writing scenes with lots of characters?
No, because I don't write a lot of scenes with lots of characters because I don't write a lot of scenes. But I think clarity is a real struggle in these scenes. In terms of editing it. When I read these scenes that end up feeling kind of muddled, what it really comes down to a lot of times for me is I don't understand everyone's positioning in the scene, and therefore when a character is speaking or we're seeing a thought or an action, I don't have clear lines on who is doing what and why, right? Like, if I know character A has a very positive feeling about the situation and character B has a very negative feeling, then I know when somebody says something harsh, it's coming from character B, right? If I'm not clear on who thinks what, then it tends to feel very muddled because anybody could be speaking at any moment, right? And so finding ways to make sure that I'm really clear on who everyone is coming into the scene and what intentions they have in this scene, I think those are the things that help me really hang on to what everybody is doing and thinking and saying throughout the scene, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I find myself thinking about musical theater, I mean, a lot in life, but also in this moment, which is that there are like sort of part of the question also is what is your intention in writing a scene with lots of characters present? So what is the thing you're trying to get out of it? So for example, I'm thinking about West Side Story, there is the dance scene where all the people are having like a dance battle, essentially, a ballet dance battle. And in the middle, Tony and Maria are Romeo and Juliet, see each other, and the other people literally in the original movie like fade to the background. The scene is really about these two people meeting in a crowd, and the other people are not, they're present, but they're not present. Like they're not really in the scene. They become the same as like having a wall sconce at that point. They're just there to show the pressures on these two individuals. And so in that case, you can really focus on, like you're saying, what are the intentions? How much are we just describing people as a group? Like, are you saying like it's Susie and Maggie and Molly and May, or is it like a group to the right, a group to the left? Do you want to, apologies to E.E. Cummings for almost getting all those names right. And so
Maggie and Millie and Molly
thinking
and May
about, do you want to just,
one day?
It's Maggie and Millie. Yeah, I went down to this to play one day. Yeah, great. One of my favorite E.E. Cummings poems, actually.
Incredible.
So I think that, yeah, sometimes you really want that feeling of like a group, but you don't really want them to feel like individuals. And so you can use big blocks of people to sort of de-emphasize the personhood in some ways of everybody but the main characters. Then you have your Les Mis overlappy scene, which many musicals have, where 10
Yeah.
people are singing at the same time about how tomorrow is what is the Les Mis one
One Day
where it's
More.
one day more. They're all hoping for something tomorrow. And the point of that song is not what any individual is saying, though it is clear to them. It's about the idea that everyone hopes for different things tomorrow. Easier
Mhm.
to pull off in a musical, but I have seen stories where like it's a gossip scene and it's almost like the gossip is being passed from one person to another. And
Yeah.
similarly, we care less about who each individual person is and more about the feeling of a room gossiping. And in
Yeah.
that point, like each individual person doesn't care. So it's less overwhelming because what you're following is the thread of the gossip, the thread of the
Yeah.
hope of the next day versus the thread of the two people meeting. And like, so what is the thread that's sort of in that big tapestry of a scene that you want the reader to be following? And when you know what that thread is, then everything that's not that just becomes, in some ways, a backdrop to the thing that you want to be calling attention to. And if it seems overwhelming, it might be because you've put focus on something that isn't that thread.
Mhm.
And therefore, you're distracting the audience or the reader from the thing that you're trying to make them follow,
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, one thing that strikes me more about
if that
the
makes
Les
sense.
Mis scene that you mentioned, right? The One Day More song is it serves two purposes. One is which to show the cohesion of the energy going into that revolutionary moment, right? Whatever side of it you're on, everyone is looking forward to this thing being over and done with and moving on to the next thing after that, right? Like whether you're on the side of the police trying to hunt down a fugitive, or whether you're a young revolutionary, you want this big thing to happen, right? And you're communicating to your reader, like, yes, we're heading into the final act here, the final moment, and is an opportunity for each character to restate their intentions and thoughts and sort of driving motivational force going into that last day, right? Like, we have the repeated course of One Day More, but then we have each character really pop in and say, hi, here's the thing I want to have happen tomorrow, right before we as the audience experience the next day, right? So, again, I think so much of how to make those things work is really crystal clear silhouettes of who each character is that lets us attach to them and learn more about them. Another like ensemble scene I was thinking about is the council scene in Fellowship of the Ring, right? Like Lord of the Rings. You're meeting the whole fellowship. You meet like 1,000 people in that scene, several of whom are important. Like the number of characters in the fellowship is like truly bonkers by modern standards of what you would do like in a novel of like, yes, you should have these 7 people go on a quest together. You're going to need to know a lot of information about all of them, right? And so that scene, I think, really slows down in a certain way to make space for each character to get their intro, right? For us to like hear from them, see them, be introduced. And again, they're coming in with such specific perspectives, right? The dwarves come in with their idea of what should happen. Gondor comes in with their idea of what should happen. The elves come in with their, you know what I mean? And so I think having that clarity and that debate is really, really important to keeping things easy to track. Now, I will say, reading Lord of the Rings as a young person, I did not understand that scene very well, right? It wasn't until probably the third or fourth time I read that when I was more of an adult that I was like, oh, damn, that's what's going on there, right? So I think part of it is like group scenes are just kind of confusing by their very nature. And so it's up to you to minimize that as much as possible by making sure that if you're putting a bunch of people in the scene, you know exactly why they're there. You can use like an overall external spine to sort of hold it together if everyone's meeting for a reason. And so I, as the reader, need a really clear understanding of why all these people are here. And then being crystal clear about each of the individual voices and perspectives in the scene.
Yeah. I also think if you're like, I don't know how to do that, like that is confusing. This is a good time to like use a small, like if you have somebody, a critique group, to give people a group scene and just ask them not to evaluate whether they thought it was good or bad, but what happened? What did
Yeah.
you actually focus on in the scene? Like, what did you understand? Who do you remember? Like, just have people read it and go like, summarize this group scene for me, having read it. And if they're all focused on like the one person who does not like the one dwarf who doesn't matter actually at all, then either you could be like, well, I should redirect that, or go, maybe that person is interesting and I think about the scene in a different way. But sometimes
Yeah.
you're so in the weeds of it that it's not until you give it to somebody else that you can see like what's landing of what you're trying to do and what's not. And then for the things that aren't, what do you need to adjust to make that clearer?
Yeah. And I just was thinking about one more very specific technique, which is what I think of as sightlines. Um, so,
Mm.
uh, Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf is like one of my favorite novels. I did my senior thesis on it in college, and one of the major scenes in that book is a group scene of walking down the street, and you sort of the narrator jumps from consciousness to consciousness throughout the scene, like from mind to mind, and we sort of see everybody's thoughts as they move through the scene. And one thing that's happening is there's like skywriting happening over this market, and so everyone's looking up and we're seeing them try to understand what is being written and nobody can quite figure it out. So but what's really useful is that one character will look at another character and that's how we jump to that next character's mind, right? It's like they'll look at the baker and then we're in the baker's mind. The baker looks, at a well-dressed woman down the street and then we're in her mind, right? So like giving us that sort of like filmic flow to the scene of really drawing our attention and then you follow that intention, right? You kind of line up the shot and then we make the jump can also really help. If you're just jumping without that signposting, it can be really confusing. So you can use the physical blocking of the scene and the attention of your characters to draw us into each character's perspective and follow the scene that way, right? So if it's a conversation, you have one character turn to their left to look at the next person they're speaking to, and then when that person speaks we know who's speaking, right? And so I think using those subtle context clues of sightlines of blocking that can help you move through the space in almost a physical way can be really helpful too. So that's a more nitty gritty answer.
I love that. I love that because it makes you think of the handoffs in a relay race. And then in
100%.
some ways, it makes you think about where do you intend your handoffs to be? Like, what do you, because
Yeah.
if you write it where just it's like a whole lot of things are happening at once, it's difficult for you, for the reader, for everyone. A lot of times it's like thinking about it as like mini handoffs. So it's like this person is doing this and then they hand it off, like you're saying, through sight. And it could be
Hmm.
through sight, or it could be through like at a party scene, it could be everyone taking from the same tray of drinks. And like as each person takes a
Hmm.
sip, that's the next person in focus. But thinking about what are your handoffs, when are they happening, and what do you want people to have gotten from it? In a musical, it's done through the scoring. Like there's a reason
Hmm.
that certain, if you ever listen to a whole bunch of people in a room try to karaoke sing One Day More, it's really bad. It's never good. But also, everyone remembers the same pieces of the song because they're the pieces where the orchestration draws your attention to a specific
Yeah.
character. They're louder, their thing is on an upswing, and the music does the handoff. So, but you
Yeah.
don't have that, so you can do the handoff in a different way.
Yeah. You don't have the rhythms and the leitmotifs to sort of like signal who's talking. But also, you've just described my worst nightmare. Being in a karaoke room of everyone trying to sing One Day More at the same time, I would truly rather die. I absolutely not. My personal
I'm
hell.
gonna arrange that for you as a future birthday present.
I will kill you in real life.
Oh
Um, okay. I
my
promise we
gosh.
get along and we are friends. All right. Is there a source for hiring authenticity readers that we would recommend? I know these sources exist. I don't know them offhand. Do you know?
They're
Do you have
real.
any on hand, Aaron?
They they change a lot because it's a
Yeah.
high burnout thing to do.
Yeah.
People will do it and they'll be like, I got a group of people doing like, who are going to do authenticity reading. And then like fast forward like a year and a half and they'll be like, I will never do this again.
It's a
So
tough gig.
it's rough to find people who want to do it and who are good at it. um, you can always like look on social media, try to find out it, but it is really hard. A lot of times it changes and it's really about who you know and like who you can reach out to in your personal
Hmm.
network who's maybe both being an authenticity reader is a specific skill, but a lot of times in a writing community you may know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, so putting it out there that that's what you want. First of all, if you'd say out loud a lot, I am looking for somebody to do authenticity reading for my book for this particular perspective, that helps because the people who are currently doing it will theoretically have their eyes out, or somebody else will be able to say, I know somebody. So sometimes it's just being out there about that that's the thing that you want at this moment.
Yeah.
And then being nice to them so that they don't quit within immediately because it's hard. And yeah, but it's good that you are hiring them. Paying people, the word hiring implies
Yes.
pay. And
Hiring is very
paying
important.
people to do your authenticity reading will put you higher up in the list of people
Mm-hmm.
who are asking folks to do work. A lot of people think people just do it for funsies, but everyone likes to get paid,
I could
especially
not
for doing work where
imagine.
you have to really think about.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine thinking that people just do authenticity
I mean,
reading for
I do
funsies.
it. Don't call me, but and it is fun.
I mean, it's really hard work. It's a very
It's fun when
difficult
people listen to
conversation.
you and you feel like you've
Yeah.
made change,
Yeah.
but it's hard to do still,
But
even
even
with the
when it
best
goes
of
well,
clients,
it's a
even on the
series
best
of
of days.
difficult conversations. It's like, hey, this thing that you didn't think about, or this thing is hitting. It's the role of the authenticity reader is a pretty thankless one. It's a very important one, and I'm glad it's like in the ecosystem. But yeah, it's tough. So yeah, pay your people well, be nice to them. In terms of resources, I know there's some databases out there. I don't know how up to date they are or who runs them at this point. A lot of times in the process, it's the publisher that's hiring them and paying for them at this point, or authors would reach out directly. So, like Aaron is saying, reach out to your network, see who if somebody knows somebody, and I would start there.
Yeah. But it's something good to think about, like from the very beginning,
Yeah.
because it can stall a project if you cannot find anyone. So it's something to think about. Not to say write whatever you want, but if your project requires a really specific perspective to be brought on as an authenticity reader, that's something to be thinking about and maybe kind of like in the back of your mind earlier on in your project, just because and have a backup
100%.
plan, I guess, like in case
Yeah.
it goes like horribly wrong. Like because it can go horribly wrong in the best of ways. Sometimes you just discover that
Yeah.
there's no way for you to tell this particular story at this particular time. And that is something that you should be ready for, which is, I think, something that a lot of people don't know when they start, is that sometimes the answer is like, this can't get authentic. It's not happening. And so like, we're just, you're not there, they're not there, the story is not there. And so
Yeah.
sometimes you end up having to put something on the back burner, and that can be sometimes people get very mad at the reader, the authenticity reader,
Yeah.
for that. That's why. And then authenticity readers take a lot of psychic damage and quit the field, and then we don't know where to find them in future. So
Yeah. Exactly. But again, I'm glad you're thinking about it, and I do encourage people to work with them, and again, to be nice to them. But all right. Well, we've hit the end of our questions. But yeah, if anyone has a last one they want to sneak in here, please drop it in the chat. Aaron, do you have any big gaming plans for the holidays? Or is there anything that you're taking your, time before next semester to dig into?
So I just went to PAX Unplugged, and so in fact, one thing I did not get to because I was working a booth and therefore did not get on the thing, was the Slay the Spire board game. Speaking of Slay the
Oh
Spire, which we talked
yeah, I
about
gotta get
earlier,
that.
I wish I could have gotten it so that I could get it. I was just thinking, an actual good birthday present for Doma, not one
Yes.
day more in a karaoke room, would be the Slay the Spire board game.
I forgot that they made that. I
But
need to check
actually,
that
I'm
out.
really okay. I'm not going to do this over the holidays, but I'm going to do it just after. So I'm going to get a little excited about this. But have you heard of Jubencha?
No.
Do you know what this is?
No,
Okay, I'm not going to
please
do a
tell
good
me.
job of explaining it, but it's amazing. I was like, and now I'm going to fail to explain it well. But they're a specific type of like murder mystery LARP in a
Huh.
box that are
Okay.
apparently really huge in parts of China. And so people do
Huh.
it like you would do karaoke, but as opposed to forcing you to listen to us. Everybody takes on roles, and they're these like really intense, deep, like no prep live action role playing murder mystery things. And there was a big YouTuber that did an entire like breakdown on how cool they are and how you can never find them in English. And people were like, we wish we had them. And one of the very first companies to make any in English was selling them at PAX. So I bought a box. And I am going to another game con in January where I'm going to try to get a group together to play this murder mystery thing that I've only heard about. So I'm very excited just to also just experience a new form of game playing and narrative. It's going to be so fun.
Yeah,
that is
cool.
something that like also Heaven's Vault, finishing it because as I said earlier, it's and we have another question, but we have a it's a language translation game, and they just put out an announcement today about something coming in 2025 in the language, but since I haven't beaten the game, I don't know what it says. So my goal for the holidays is to learn enough in the game so I can read their message on Blue Sky. So
you're like,
great.
I just
it's like it doesn't.
I don't need to read a press release.
Exactly. It's like, what do these symbols mean? Even
Incredible.
their tweets or like what are their skeets or whatever we're calling them are puzzles. So what about you before we get back into our final question? Any fun plans?
I've had such a bonkers busy year that my big plan next week is to finally play the Elden Ring DLC. And the idea that I haven't played it yet is literally killing me. So I think finding a little time to do that, but I also have a million other things I need to do next week, so we'll see if that happens. I got to build a table. I got to do all kinds of stuff, so we'll see.
Build a table?
Yeah, I don't have furniture.
I'm very excited. I do
have furniture. Building. I just don't have a dining table right now. I moved across the country, and so I would like to. I need to make one. So that's my goal. Nice. Okay, we have one last question. Mariel Brown asks, do you have any tips on diving back into structured writing after taking some time away? Do you have any thoughts on this one?
I will say the first one is that like you kind of just have to do it. Like it's just hard. It's hard. It is hard to do. I am reminded of I used to be a very nervous flyer, became less so. And then after the sort of super like part of the pandemic where no one went anywhere, when I had to fly for the first time again, I was like, oh, I'm feeling all the things that I'm not used to this anymore. My body's not used to it. My mind isn't used to like the way I do this. And so like I'm suddenly freaked out in a way that I haven't been in years. And I think that's true of anything. And so expecting that it might be a little bit both exhilarating and rough sledding an exhilarating rough downhill sled at the same time is one way to get into it, and to just like be gentle with yourself and start with things that are really a manageable thing for you to do. Like going from nothing to I'm going to write 10,000 words a day is, hey, if you can do it, more power. But maybe saying like, I'm going to at least sit down and stare in front of my computer for 30 minutes a day, whether I write one word, 10, a million, or 0, is a good way to like give yourself something that's doable so that you don't feel, because it can be easy to get discouraged and say, I was better off when I wasn't doing this at all.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to our answer to the first question, which was, we talked for quite a bit there, but, think about setting your intention for this, think about what it is you're trying to accomplish at a high level, and then think about what material things you can do to move that forward, right? And, don't just let your desire to write, 5,000 words a day or write for 30 minutes a day or whatever it is, discourage you from actually doing the thing, right? Find ways to be gentle with yourself, to be easy on yourself as you figure that out, and to make sure you're setting what goals you are setting, what structure you are putting in place is very achievable. And, this is very much an under promise and over deliver to yourself kind of thing, right? And then consider what things that you can be doing that aren't just putting words on the page that add to this practice, right? What are you reading? What are you thinking about? What are you plotting? What other activities can you be doing to help support this? Whether that's, taking time for yourself to take a walk and think about your project, to, make sure you're reading something in the genre and category that you're in, to, whatever it is, finding those ways to support your practice that isn't purely doing the thing itself. And yeah, I think the biggest one is just being gentle with yourself, right? Don't let a hiccup or the fact that it's hard to do or you're feeling frustrated stop you from doing the thing. And accept that it can be a really tough process to write under any conditions. And then when you've been away from it for a while, even more so. So I think, yeah, I think that's it. I think just be easy on yourself. Think
Yeah.
about broad goals and ways you can support that, and take it bit by bit.
I think also, in addition to that, two other things. One is sometimes prompts and like sometimes having a structure that's not your own can help. It
Mhm.
could be writing excuses, exercises. It could be work. I knew a group of people who were getting back into structured writing who did work their way through the exercises in Steering the Craft by Ursula K. Le Guin and just did one every like month, and was like, I'm going to do this one prompt and everything else, but this one thing I want to get through. So sometimes having things like that, I actually love from a game perspective, solo journaling TTRPGs where you
Mhm.
roll dice and like write out the end of the world or two people meeting from across the crowded room. There are tons and tons and tons of great solo tabletop games that just give you a prompt. They give you a reason to be writing. And then
Mhm.
that can really help if you're having trouble like self generating a reason that day. It gives you something to do. And then the last one I would say is, we talked about this earlier, knowing yourself, which is how do you dive back into other things that you've ever not done? So the more things in general that you've done, if you were like, hey, I used to want to cook and then I didn't. And what helped me was having a recipe book and I just worked my way through it and that got me back into cooking, then prompts might work for you. If you were like, if you were like, I just decided to go out and eat every day and that would inspire me to cook, then reading other people's works might be the thing that you want to do. Like thinking about
Yeah.
what is it that motivates you as a person and then leaning into that because you are you, whether you're a writer, whether you're writing or not. And so a lot of the tips and tricks that you've learned for yourself over the years will work in this setting. You just have to figure out how to fit them into a new way. Yeah.
Yeah, that
And
makes
sometimes
sense.
you do just need a little time away and then you just stretch and you go, whoop, back in the game.
Exactly. I mean, the only way through is just by doing it, but I think yeah, being gentle and being easy on yourself and figuring out what things work for you bit by bit is the only answer. So, good luck, Marielle, and I think you'll figure it out. Okay,
You
and
got
with
this.
that, yeah, and with that, thank you all for coming to this last Q&A of the year. And thank you for asking such great questions. And thank you to Aaron, my co-host, for being such a delightful conversation partner as always. Um, we'll
Thank
see you
you.
guys next year, and I hope everyone has a really delightful holiday.
See y'all in
Okay,
2025.
bye, guys.